Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, welcome to another episode of the Wisdom of, and my guest today is Kent Yoshimura. I want to go through his background in a minute because it's a broad and interesting range of things that he's done at high levels of performance, not just one or two, and a really interesting mix of experiences that will give him some useful insights for all of us. We live in, as I keep saying, an increasingly complex world, politically, socially, economically, and if people aren't sure about the certainty of the future. And so what we're trying to do with the Wisdom of is speak with business leaders around the world and tap into the wisdom that's come from their experiences and lessons and make them available for others. And so my guest today, Kent, is one of the founders of Neuro with his partner, Ryan. And Neuro is really about this idea of putting mental clarity in your pocket using nootropics. And Kent, I'm sure there'll be people that are going, oh, nootropics, and we'll need to talk about that, obviously, because I know that they're unique in the way that you're doing it through, gums and chews and things like that. But I just want to reflect on my notes because I don't really want to miss anything. I want people to get a sense of the scope of the kinds of interests that you've had. And so, if the mission is to help people be the best version of themselves anywhere, anytime, by putting mental clarity in their pocket. I love that. What I love more is, when people go to the website, there's this one line which I think should be a byline for every company. If free enterprise should be one of the most powerful forces for good on the planet because it's self-sustaining through profit, and yet it can do things that governments can't across international boundaries, and it's not reliant upon handouts like charities and not-for-profits. There's one line on your website, we just wanted to do more. It's kind of like it should be the byline of every company in the world, as opposed to we just want to make more, or gain more. I mean, there's already a depth of wisdom in that shift of focus. But you're a multimedia artist, creative director, athlete, entrepreneur, have competed at world levels in forms of martial arts. You're painting large scale murals worldwide. Above Water, a movie project that you did when you went to, what was the island in Alaska, just off Alaska?
Yeah, Shishmaref, Alaska. It's one of the most remote islands in North America. You can actually see Russia from that
okay.
island.
Oh, is that right? Okay. So,
yeah.
And you went up there to paint a mural. But what became apparent is how much smaller the island is getting.
It's crazy.
And so that triggered, the movie project Above Water to talk about that. You studied neuroscience at UCSD and then into the film program at UCLA. Content for brands like McDonald's, Lego, Benjamin Moore, and others, and a children's book illustrator and brand director. Like, this is a fascinating eclectic mix. And then, of course, through multiple experiences, obviously, with your friend from university in 2015, you funded Neuro. And I think that story is interesting, how the two of you arrived at that, because you were friends through uni. You talk about, when the right energy just meets you in another person and you just click, that thing just happens. But then if you could just expand the story for people watching the episode, listening to the episode, I think that's interesting in and of itself.
Yeah, we can start there. It's interesting because in college, I was training more or less professionally in martial arts. I was flying Thailand every year. I was flying Japan every year to train with the Olympic team for judo out there. And supplementation, as well as balancing my school and personal life, was getting increasingly harder, as one may imagine. And Ryan, my co-founder, who I met in Japanese class and was an incredible athlete himself. He was one of the fastest kids in California, was captain of his cross country and track team, led them to nationals. got in a really bad snowboarding accident when he was 19. So I knew him about a year and a half before his injury. Then he got injured. That left him paralyzed from the waist down. And those supplements I was taking, which were, I guess, the early stages of nootropics at the time. And I used the word nootropics in the technical sense of a supplement that provides cognitive benefits with no or minimal side effects. Um, but also for me, I look at nootropics as anything that is more clinically and science backed to provide more optimal mental performance just in general. And looking at my neuroscience background and looking at supplementation and using myself as a guinea pig, I knew that what I was mixing could help Ryan bounce back into school, into whatever activity he wanted to do, despite this life altering injury of becoming paralyzed from the waist down. And through that journey, we both realized that if we want to expand the accessibility for a product like we were creating to the masses, we would have to put it into a more consumable and friendly format, which is where the idea for putting the supplements into gum and mints came to be. And then, we are where we are now, and I think like 40,000 plus retail stores. We're like a top 100 health and household product on Amazon. We're one of the top brands on TikTok Shop. So knock on wood that doesn't get taken away. But we continue to realize that people do want to feel better mentally and physically on a daily basis, but the accessibility format needs to be there. And if people are already chewing gum, if people are already taking mint and placing them in their pockets, why not add those benefits in? And obviously that message resonated with people. And when that accessibility clicks with an ability for someone to do more, you can achieve much, much more, without necessarily falling into this, what you alluded to, the cycle of consumption. Yes. Like you could accomplish more through experiences, through relationships, through anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you've really highlighted, I mean, I speak and meet with hundreds of business leaders every year. And the reality is businesses start for one of two reasons. Well, there's three levels. If you think about, three levels from the most shallow level down to the deepest level at the bottom. At the top, someone might start a business because they say, there's a market there, we could make money. And they make a product and sell it. And often that ends up being commoditized and everything else, but there's a market there, we could make money. And then at the next level down below that, there's a need there, we could solve a problem, which starts to bring in a bit more intentionality about it. And we need to do this well if we're going to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. At the deepest level, there's a purpose or a cause there, and we can really make a difference, and those the order of thinking at each of those levels gives rise to wildly different kind of organizational structures and business intentionality and everything else. And I have conversations with founders almost every day, and when I take them back to and everyone's looking for the value in our product that helps us to differentiate. That's the common business conversation. How do we differentiate? And differentiation is almost always in the founder's story, and often the founders have forgotten the story. Or the story was there's a market there, we can make money, which brings its own problems for differentiation. But your story that you've just shared reads through absolutely powerfully in that one line, we wanted to do more. And it's a real story, personal experience of one of the founders. So you are the guinea pigs of your own product, if you like. We're chewing the chews and drinking the Kool-Aid, if you like. So, it's an interesting thing. So the business was born out of a powerful relationship between the two founders. And there's a lot of horror stories of people going into business together in partnerships and everything else. Sometimes family, sometimes just friends, but clearly this meeting of spirits occurred, this meeting of energy occurred and everything else. Do you and Ryan, have you consciously given thought to the fact that you are also co-founders and business partners, as well as great mates, as we would say in Australia. And have you done any thinking around that for anyone that is heading into or in business or at the top of a company with someone with whom they have a deep personal relationship as much as a business relationship? Have you done any conscious things around
Yeah.
that?
Ryan and I may have like opposing thoughts at from times, like everyone does, right? Like even with
Yeah.
your closest friends. But at the core, there is a genuine and authentic relationship that we have with each other, which is through our friendship, our brotherhood, that ultimately leads to a lot of the decisions we make. And in many ways, I'm grateful for that authenticity because within those three layers that you even mentioned,
Yeah.
which is is very true. That's how the majority of businesses operate. It's unless you're authentic to yourself or the core values of a business that you're trying to create and what
Mm.
you're aiming for, then things do begin falling apart. And in many ways, the friendship that Ryan and I have and this desire to do more, and this desire to create a product that's accessible to everyone to allow them to do more is coming from this very authentic place, which stems from our relationship with each other. So,
Mm.
it's not like we don't have our differences of opinion. In fact, I think having a difference in opinion on certain matters is powerful on its own right,
Yeah.
but we always come back to the core and we have our, defined roles and responsibilities that ultimately lead to, I think, conscious decision making, with with the right path being chosen the majority of
Yeah.
the time.
It's interesting. I've done a lot of work with C-suite executive teams, and
Mhm.
particularly in publicly listed companies, they are generally, hired senior executive managers, reporting to a board, and the original founder, may be well out of the business. I've actually worked with teams that have made statements like, we're work colleagues, we don't have to be friends. And you almost always see that reflected in the organization
Yeah.
because there is no agenda to build relationships at work, yet we spend so much of our time working with people. And as we have
Yeah.
distributed work teams, I think relationships are perhaps even more important as we
Yeah.
don't necessarily have people sitting in the same building together and things like that. And being able to arrive at decisions that are made authentically, ethically, with the right conscience requires a level of respect for the people you're making the decisions with first.
Of course. Well, in good business, the foundation of a good business is trust.
Yeah,
So if I can't even trust my co-founder, who is also my best friend, it's everything starts to
it's a
crumble. And
problem.
the fact that we are so close with each other allows us to develop these partnerships in many ways with other people that have helped grow the business.
Right.
And all of us operate with, obviously with a level of professionalism, but there's an immense level of trust that I think people see between Ryan and I that they see in each other when we make decisions in the business, when we make decisions between each other at a departmental level and an individual level, that translates to whatever it is that we do.
Is that how old were you when in 2015 when you guys launched it?
26, 27.
Okay.
Yeah, around that age. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Making me feel healthily more mature. So,
Yeah, I'll say we're definitely not mature then. I don't know how mature I am now, but
is there anything you learned as you launched the company and over the last 10 years now
yeah.
that had you known it would have given you reason for pause uh, back in 2015, or was I suspect you didn't know anywhere near as much as you do about running a company and business as you do now. And so for all of us that have started businesses, that first step in, and it might not have been your first step, you might have done other things before that, but that first step in is often laced with a whole lot of naivety in terms of,
Yeah.
so that happens and that happens. And, is there anything that you've learned that in the last 10 years that had you known it back then, it would have given you a moment of pause to address it so the path was a little easier, as you move forward?
Yeah, I mean, trust is a double-edged sword because there's definitely partners that I probably put too much trust into that obviously didn't work out. But then on the flip side, you know, if I didn't go through those moments, I'm of the philosophy that everything does happen for a reason, and there are no mistakes as long as you learn from them. And every situation that we've gotten ourselves into that may have been negative has only propelled us further because we try not to make those exact same mistakes. Um, so that's one. And then secondarily, with everything that I have involved myself with, I think my focus was distributed in too many different places because
Right.
I had the energy to be able to do so when I'm in my early 30s, late
Yeah.
20s. But being able to merge it all together
Yeah.
in a more coherent way and cohesive way has led to Neuro being, finding success in the one thing I put my focus in, which is obviously the company I run now.
Yeah.
So
So that's
yeah,
look,
there's shiny ball syndrome,
yeah.
especially when you're in your late 20s,
Uh,
and with maturity that shiny ball becomes less shiny, or you learn to
well, yeah,
push it away.
or sometimes it gets worse.
Exactly.
It's an entrepreneurial weakness. Like, oh, that's new, and
Yeah.
so let's do that too. And I know plenty of older entrepreneurs who are attracted to. I mean, AI is fascinating. AI has distracted a lot of people. I mean,
Oh yeah.
AI may well be one of the most unsettling yet most productive shifts in technology we've ever had. Unsettling because let's put aside whether it's the greatest existential crisis to confront mankind or not. That's not a conversation for us to have today, but
No.
unsettling because it's moving at such a pace no one can really get a handle on it. What's the best thing to do for your business from an AI perspective without actually destabilizing the business? And yet
Yeah.
we know it's wildly productive and useful. So how do we get the greatest gain? Look, we'll come back to AI. I'd love to stay with neuro for a moment. You made a really interesting statement. And so, um, these are natural ingredients that, scientifically are proven to give some of these particularly mental benefits to people. And you mentioned kind of outside of traditional supplements that athletes and things might use. But the really clever thing you did was the packaging, which was the mints and gums. Anyone that has children knows that how you wrap the Christmas present under the tree is as important as the present. And
Hmm. Hmm.
every solution a company takes to market has to have, wrapping that matters. The delivery mechanism needs to make it consumable. It's interesting. It's the delivery mechanism that makes a product or service consumable, not the solution itself. If you're a consulting firm, how you run your consulting solutions and projects is what makes it consumable for the people you're consulting.
Yeah.
If you're a doctor, how you run your clinic is what makes your service consumable. If you supply nootropics, it's how you give it to the person to use that makes it consumable. If you're
Yeah.
if you're in behavior change, it's how you get people to do the things you need them to do to form good habits that makes it consumable. The packaging makes the product consumable. We build visual models to codify original genius in companies because the models package genius and make it consumable. Packaging matters. So super clever, but that you put it into gums and mints. But the company, how many outlets did you say now worldwide?
Close to 50,000, 40
Okay.
something thousand. Yeah.
So there's real scale being achieved. I'd love you to step through, are there two or three pivotal strategies that you and Ryan undertook that you've spoken about partners and things? Are there two or three pivotal
Yeah.
strategies that you think really were the powerhouse of driving the kind of growth that Neuro's had?
Well, to your point, I think in business, the way we look at it is the synonym would be branding,
Yeah.
and the way we present ourselves. And you could be a doctor, but if your clinic looks way better and there's a reliability and trust in your clinic, I'll probably go to you instead of this other guy down the street,
Yeah.
although he might be a better doctor, right?
Yeah.
Because just purely from a presentation perspective
Yeah. But
and
who
and
would know?
packaging perspective.
But who
But
would
who would
know?
know?
Because
Exactly.
we're not
At the end
experts,
of the
right?
day, the
Yeah.
consumer can only see what they're presented, and our branding exercise that we went through early on, which, I'm grateful that I had this like art background because
Yes.
primarily art is all about presentation in many
Yeah.
ways, and what you're able to communicate, and the philosophy that you want to communicate through visual representation. So transferring that into a business mindset, into our packaging, into how we present ourselves, into our mission statements, into our positioning, all those things were pretty critical for our business because it was a little bit disjointed prior to going through that exercise. And then secondly, if I were to choose, what we do have like pretty clear business principles,
Mm.
core values that we run the entire company by. And the entire company knows what those core values would would be, whether it's Kaizen, like the idea of personal development,
Yeah.
servant mindset. So there's no necessarily like distinct hierarchy that we should feel when we task each other with
Yeah.
certain goals. And when we start operating with similar ideologies, those are the principles that you build your company off of. And I think a lot of the time people may be too focused on making money or people or whatever it happens to be in business that they forget that there are de facto things that you could set in place and structures that you could set in place to help build a business. And all these big companies have that formula that they've developed themselves
Mm.
independently to lead them. So there's different ways of doing it, but there's a reason they run distinctively of each other, although they may have similar services.
Yeah.
TikTok, Facebook, whoever happens to be, right. We have competitors in our own space. We look at energy shots even as our competitors, but the way we present ourselves is definitely a lot cleaner. Um, and we operate in slightly different ways.
Yeah. It's metrics are really important
Mm-hmm.
in business. And I also, reasonably regularly see the focus on metrics eliminating attention to method. And metrics should not eliminate attention to method. Like, what is the
Mm-hmm.
methodology of your business? And methodology includes, what are the values we're going to live by? Like, who are we going to be? How are we going to show up? What are we going to do? And what impact do we want to have? And then what are the mechanics inside of that? What's the model that we're going to go to market with? What's our method? But metrics should never um, hide, focus on method. You've got to consciously make decisions about
Yeah.
what the business is going to be.
I mean, the
So
data is always as important as how you interpret it,
yeah,
and
correct.
like the actions that you take on it. So,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And some data at gut feel level is absolutely also valid. I mean, I was going to
Yeah.
you're in a consumer market, and everybody in business wants to be able to see around corners and know what's coming, so that we can be on the front of the wave, not the back of the wave. And I think that's particularly true when you're in a consumer based marketplace, right, as opposed to, say, business to business or something like that. How do you tap into, are there things that you're doing all the time so that you're on the front edge of consumer trends and thinking? Because in the world of the influencer that we live in now and the speed of social media, trends can change overnight, much
Yeah.
faster than they once used to. You mentioned when we were talking before we started recording, TikTok's been a good platform for you. I suspect, most social media platforms have. Have they been key to you staying ahead of consumer trends? Are there other things that you're doing that other companies in consumer, industries might learn from, allow you to stay on the front curve of what you're doing? I suspect it's a very
Yeah.
competitive market.
It is. I mean, there's a reason there's founder groups and there's different, I'm part of many groups that are always talking with each other on what's going to happen if TikTok gets banned or what's going to happen about this with retail and how do you guys deal with chargebacks? I'm using like industry terminology right now, but being able to consult with others that are going through the same exercise that you are, and then distilling it down to translate to your team, or having department leads and team leads be able to do the exact same thing is pretty critical. I mean, we spend like six figures a year on consumer insights and looking at our data and do the pretty typical traditional stuff as well to get an understanding of like who are the people that are already within our database or who are the people that are already
Mm.
interacting with our product. But it goes that intuition goes one layer above that all the
Yeah.
time, in my opinion. And you can only get that intuition and build that experience of intuition by getting, as much feedback as possible, integrating yourself into these organizations, getting that experience. And that's why, when we typically see it's like a star that burns bright burns out faster, right? It's the exact same thing. Like they haven't built that foundation to be able to deal with the roller coaster of life, the roller coaster of business, because it's no matter what stage you're at, you're inevitably going to run into it. It's just whether you're experienced enough to handle it or not.
Yeah. That's, it's absolutely true. Have you built the muscle? And I mean, it's interesting you bring up intuition. Your intuition builds and gets stronger the longer you're in the field of play.
Yes.
You've been an athlete at international levels. I played high levels of sport in my young adult years, and I've worked with numbers of Australian sporting teams and things like that. Um, as long as you're in the field of play or right on the edge of it as a coach, your intuition is usually pretty good. But as you step back from it, you can maintain physical fitness, but what actually goes relatively quickly is that split second intuition that caused you to turn in one direction and not
Yeah.
another. And it was the right decision, right? And so, in a world obsessed with build a business that is turnkey, that you don't have to be involved in, we never saw people like Steve Jobs and others other than when he was forced, stepping away from Apple and not being involved in it,
Yeah.
right? Because he probably was always intuitively connected to his market. What are people
Yeah.
doing with these devices that we're making? And you and Ryan are obviously in the field of play with this all the time and every day. And so, decisions for founders who are then appointing someone who's going to run their company for them without them, and they'll sit at the board, are really saying, I need to hire someone who has the same level of intuitive genius that I do for what is going to win for us in this marketplace in business. How do you recruit for that, right? I'm not sure that you can easily. It's tricky.
I mean, I think people is it's the best and the hardest thing, right? that
Yeah.
makes up an organization. And we have principles and SOPs on hiring because we try to build the criteria for it based on the great hires that we've had in the past and how we went through that process. But of course, like continuously working on refining that. Google's infamous for having their weird
Yeah.
multi-choice questions and whatnot. But um, I guess that all falls into the bucket of intuition as well. Like how are you able to pinpoint out people that are going to be fitting from a not just a work and high performance standard, but from a culture standard as well to help elevate everyone, team versus self, and turn the organization into something even stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, people are and will be the key, even with the rise of AI.
Yeah.
And as the technology line, raises, it tends to drop all human contribution below the line to zero value. When the industrial age came, it dropped labor to effectively zero value because we had mechanization.
Yeah.
Mechanization moved to automation. We're in a world of cognification now with AI. And so, this whole middle bit, if you were in the business of writing contracts for companies, that's gone, right? Um,
Yeah.
so now we're in the business of discerning whether that's a good contract that's been produced for us. And so the human contribution keeps elevating. And it does bring us to this conversation about technology and particularly AI. I mean, I suspect also because of what you do, you live in a world where wearables are, the people that might be interested. Yeah, exactly. Right. The people that might be. So is that the Aura ring that you're wearing? That
It
particular?
is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The people that, probably are looking at your products are probably looking at wearables and how much more can we know about our body and our health and our mental state and where we're at. And where do you see some of the technology heading, in and alongside your space? And even the understanding of neuroscience is a
Mhm.
form of technology, if you like.
Yeah.
So I'm not specifically meaning AI or digital tech, but where do you
Yeah.
see
I mean,
technology?
my focus was on cognitive science,
Yeah.
within neuroscience. So we talked about neural networks and neural models, like, there's like 15 years ago or so now. since I graduated college, but we were diving into neural networks and large not at that time. It was a little bit different, but like large language models,
Mm,
even in our discussions and how that could translate into you know deeper cognitive thought. I think it just came a lot faster than all of us expected, which is quite wild and expanding at a
mm,
rate that's much faster than all of us expected. So, even with like the biofeedback stuff, like the Aura Ring or Garmin or Whoop,
mm,
these wearables, that data is only as important as you make it,
mm,
right? So how you leverage that data into and how it translates into your own life is what's more important, which is the human element of it. And in the same way with our business, we're starting to integrate AI pretty seriously into several departments. The first one being customer success and
mm,
customer responses in general. But the way I framed it to my team is this is a way for us to elevate beyond this uh, lower level of customer success on how we respond to tickets to how do we build better retention mechanisms? How are we responding and building strategy in a way that allows us to communicate with the customer where we anticipate what they're going to be able to say
mm.
and staying one step ahead of what AI is currently able to do. And that's how us as humans can continue to elevate each other. And I feel the same way with my art and other artists as well. Like if you feel like AI has taken over your job or what you're doing in art and your creativity and you feel like creativity is dead, then you probably weren't meant to be an artist to begin with because there's an endless creativity, in my opinion, is endless. And you could keep pushing and maybe shifting and adapting to what AI is allowing you to do. You can still be working with traditional mediums, but keep pushing what your cognitive whatever your cognitive bounds are to keep expanding. And the beauty of art is that it reflects the moment in life that you're at. And I look back at my old art, and that is a period in time that I was working in that way. I was painting or drawing or creating or building experiences in that way.
Yeah.
I, my hope is that people get reconnected back to the human element as AI allows us to do so.
Well, as I said earlier, I have this model where I talk about the AI line, and there's a whole series of um, contributions that humans can make. Um, from contemplation at the top, deep philosophical thinking about what's going on, right? Through conscience, what is the right thing to do? You know,
Yeah.
connection, human relationships, uh, context. Here's why we need to do some things. Concepts, communication, content, compilation, etc., etc. And so, as the AI line moves up, it sweeps everything underneath it. So things like content, compiling, concepts, even communication now through AI agents, it's all been swept up by AI. And so the question is, what still sits above the AI line and probably will sit above the AI line for humans for quite some time yet? Conscience is certainly one of them. What is the right thing to do as a company? And for everybody working in neuro, what is the right thing to do as a member of the neuro team, right?
Yeah.
Contemplation. What does this even mean? I mean, we just want to do more. That's a philosophical viewpoint expressed, right? Um, and connection is a human to human thing, not human to machine. I do know people are having conversations with chat, for example, and about
Yeah.
a whole
Dead
range of
internet
things.
theory.
But really,
Yeah.
and so I think there will be higher order human things that stay above the line, and creativity is one of them. Creative cognition um,
Yeah.
is absolutely one of them. I think we'll get levels of creativity out of AI, but that left of center thing. I read an article somewhere that was saying things made by humans will be infinitely more valuable, because
Yeah.
they're actually made by a human. Let's talk about art for a moment. You spoke about that. You paint large scale murals. You are in experiential art that obviously involves a whole bunch of other people as well as you're doing it. And I mean, every installation that you do is probably a mini business of its own. You know,
Yeah.
it's like there's a space to be filled, a problem to be solved, a contribution to be made. How do I get the right partners and people together and the permission to do it and all of those sorts of things? What have you learned out of your art journey that you also pull into business and other aspects of success? Because art really is, I think, an important form of expression that we have to hold on to.
Yeah. From business perspective, with campaign planning, that's probably the closest thing that we do in business right now to what I do with my murals. Because with most of my murals or even experiential buildings, which experiential build outs I actually don't do too much anymore because it just takes way too much energy and time, and it takes me away from the business too much. But we'll have a seven-figure contract on an experiential build out. We break out into teams, we build departments, we get project managers, creative directors, so on and so forth. And we have 1 to 3 months to build out, let's say, like with camp, an entire toy store where we're going to know like 500,000 people are going to go through it in the next few months, you know? And being able to identify like all the pain points of working with the build out itself is not the complicated part because you get creative, you know what you're going to build, what things matter. But dealing with people in a high stress environment and making sure that all of us are aligned to get to the end is hyper important. This New York, we activated Times Square last month for Neuro for our end of year campaign with TikTok Shop. So we were in all the subway stations in Times Square for 10 days and adjacent. We were activated on the Times Square Tower for Christmas. And for that, it was a very intense, 10 days, 14 days plus, with a month of planning. A lot of us, a small group of us, it was about like 7 of us, even slept at the TikTok offices to be able to finish like everything that we needed to do. And that entire time, while all of us were, like we're taking jabs at each other, we're like laughing. No, even in that high stress environment, everyone was so excited to be there, seeing the impact that we're making in the business. And there was like no conflicts that ever broke out. And, I think all of our department leads just did such an incredible job building that culture, obviously alongside me as well, but I attributed more to them where they were able to maintain effective roles and responsibilities in a way that we need to get this project done. What's everyone's roles? It's going to be stressful, but we're going to buckle down and get this awesome thing done together. And going back to AI, I don't think AI communication is going to be effective at being a
No.
glue to get people to finish something that is a moment in time that's going to be very impactful. And everyone's going to remember that for the rest of their lives.
That's interesting. Everyone's going to remember it.
Yeah.
It leans into this idea of immersive consumer experiences and things. Interesting statement. Getting people to work really effectively together in a high pressure environment. How important is the value and meaning of the thing you're going to do? I suspect if that can't drive it, as one human by themselves, the thing itself needs to be important and meaningful for people to do.
Right. What's the incentive?
Yeah.
Right. Is it moral? Is it cash? Is it experiential? You have to mix and match all those things in a way to make it effective for everyone. Yeah.
Interesting.
So,
Yeah.
and with murals too, it's very simple. Murals are obviously shorter term. It's like I could finish a mural in a day, like we did at Whole Foods recently, last week. Or sometimes it takes 2 weeks if we're painting like a 5,000 square foot wall, on a side of a building. And even in those situations, as long as things are organized, we know what we need to do on a daily basis. The team just needs to focus on painting, and the rest of the time we're just joking around, getting the work done. And at the end of the day, we all get a beer, and it's awesome.
So let's talk about very large murals. I look at very large murals on the side of a hotel. There's one in Perth that covers the entire
Hmm.
height of the tower, painted by apparently a well-known Australian mural artist. And the detail is extraordinary. And at the same time, I'm thinking, well, when you're on a scaffolding right up close to it, you can't see it
Yeah.
with perspective. What's how do you move between I'm looking at this piece and I'm painting it and it's a part of this big picture? Or do you plan it all out and then just follow the plan? Or
Yeah, it's both. You plan it all out. You have waypoints on the wall that you know like certain things need to be, and then you draw against those points. But one thing I say about murals is it might look hyper because I have hyper detailed murals too. Although I typically tend to draw like less, not as realistic murals versus like my traditional painting styles that I do for myself. People only look at certain points and they believe that those focal points are the only things that need to have the details, which is interesting.
isn't it?
And you can look at that with like concept, or you can look at that with almost all paintings, like even Michelangelo paintings. He doesn't draw the fine details of everything, like the backdrops, but he'll make sure the faces all look good because humans are attracted to faces. To make sure the proportions at least look good, but you're not looking at the tiny little details on, like he's not drawing the fingerprints, for example, on a painting. But if you find and prioritize the things that matter that you think the eye is going to be focused to or the viewer is going to be focused to, then they'll think that that is a hyper detailed mural that's accomplishing what it needs to accomplish. And funny enough, I guess that translates to everything else in life,
Well,
right?
it sounds like a great lesson for business, right? So
Yeah.
know what the focal points of your market are or of your audience,
Yep.
and and have them in detail because that's what they're going to gravitate towards. Understand what the big picture needs to be, but then create the waypoints that you need
Yep.
to hit as you move through to get it done. And then get into action and have fun while you're doing it. Actually stand at
And
the
funny
yellow
enough,
pages.
less experienced artists and less experienced muralists, like artists in general, try to draw detail on everything, and it looks so confusing, and it looks like there's way too much going on the page. So you just, I mean, it's impressive that they do this like hyper detailed painting, but the things us humans look at and are almost powered by are things like the Mona Lisa, where if you look at the background and like the way he draws, like
Yeah.
even her clothing, it doesn't have that detail, but her face, which is the most important thing, her eyes, the Mona Lisa glare, like those are the things that he puts the most attention into that makes that painting as
Yeah.
impactful as it is. And it's incredible that the best artists are able to find out what that is that resonates the most with the appreciator of that art.
It's interesting. There's a great book called Understanding Comics, and
Mm.
it's the science of drawing comics and comic books.
I know that book. Yeah, it's
Yeah, yeah,
with the guy with the glasses
yeah,
on the
correct.
front cover. Yeah, yeah.
And the faces of the evil characters in comics are very detailed, and the
Mm.
face of the hero is actually not. And the reason for that is we seldom see our own face other than when we look in the mirror. So to most of us, our own face is kind of nondescript. And so when someone's reading the comic, if the hero's face is kind of bland and nondescript, they can put themselves into the hero's role. But because the evil people have very detailed faces with scowling, they never put themselves into that role. It draws people into the role that the artists actually want the audience to participate in. It's fascinating where people's focus,
It is.
where you draw people's gaze, you draw their attention.
Yeah.
It really is that simple.
From a neuroscience perspective, one of the most important centers in the brain is like the facial fusiform area, which is distinctly there to recognize faces. Which is why when we look at a chair that has two holes and like maybe a thing that looks
We
like a
see a
mouth,
face,
we're like, oh my God, it's a face. Like
the
we
lights on the back of
recognize
the
these
car or whatever.
patterns. Yeah, yeah, exactly. We
Yeah,
recognize these patterns. It's incredible. It's
yeah.
built into us as humans.
So let's talk briefly, and then we'll wrap it up. And I appreciate your time. Let's talk briefly. We live in a world where people are increasingly trying to increase health longevity. People are, trying to biohack. People are trying to get clearer, sharper focus. People do, intermittent fasting and ice bathing and all sorts of things for clarity. Um, and there will be people that have views about nootropics. Are they a good thing or a bad thing? And there'll be people that are using them. You're in the business, and I'd love to get your take specifically about neuro. Actually, I mean, you don't have
Mhm.
to, Like what are just give people the explanation of that for people who might not have a sense of what it actually is. We know it's delivered in gums and mints, so it's easy to get access to, but some of the benefits and the nature of it and, the safety of it and the efficacy of it and those
Definitely.
sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, the simplest
Yeah.
way to put it is supplementation in a more accessible format, which is in gum and mints, in our opinion. And if for our flagship product, our energy and focus, it's actually very simple. It is natural caffeine combined with L-theanine, which is the amino acid in green tea, with the best forms of B6 and B12 vitamin, the methylcobalamin format. And we put it into a patented way that we make our gum, which is cold compressed so the ingredients don't break down, and you buccally absorb it because you chew on the product. So you actually absorb it faster into your system. And that combination of the caffeine, L-theanine, B6, and B12 in that format of the gum has hundreds of scientific articles that show it's the main, funny enough, it's the main compounds that are found in matcha as well.
Mm.
Matcha has caffeine and it has this L-theanine, which is its main amino acid compound. And you could tell that there's a clear difference between taking an energy drink and drinking a matcha and how you could have this like sustained focused and energy. And all we do is put that into a more accessible format.
Mm.
And we do the same thing with our Common Clarity product, which is vitamin D3, the sunshine vitamin that a lot of people need to uplift their mood, GABA, the main neurotransmitter to de-stress you, and then L-theanine, which is that main amino acid compound, which if you extract the caffeine away from it, helps you maintain a very stable alpha state and where you're focused. So all these things that we do, we look at the science behind it, we look at the combination of the science behind it. We know it already works because other people have done it, or scientific articles and clinical trials have tested it, but we put it in a way where you could get it on a daily basis in the easiest way possible. Whether it's our sleep product, our memory and focus, we have a multivitamin product, we have other products, but like that's our approach. And so it's not necessarily complicated. We just know that there's things that work and we know that people could use it throughout the day.
It's also a lesson for business. It's not necessarily complicated. We just know it works.
Yeah.
It's like
what's funny is like people look at these like athletic greens and I'm a fan of the company itself, but we're not a 50-in-1 product because there's no magic pill that has a panacea of everything that's going to work for you to turn you into a perfect human being. But there are the little things that you can do every single day that can make your life a little bit better. Whether even if it's like a 1-minute cold plunge in the morning to elevate your serotonin levels for the entire day,
Yeah.
And like those are the things that I think matter more. Consistently good versus occasionally great to create yourself and your future self to be better.
I love that statement, and I just want to repeat it. Consistently good instead of occasionally great.
Yeah.
It's just a great mantra. If I want to extract wisdom for younger leaders in the world and in business today. And obviously, without notice, you weren't prepped for this, but if you could go back and give your 2015 self 2 or 3 significant pieces of wise advice based on what you know now, what might you have said to the 2015 Kent and Ryan? Actually, you're sitting them both down,
Yeah,
and giving them advice. What might you share with them?
I would say don't forego sleep and exercise, because I think when I was at my busiest, I would pull all-nighters all the time. I'll forego exercise. And those are things that allowed me to have the mental clarity alongside the product, of course, and the things I take supplementation wise to be able to lead at the highest level. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs get so caught up in the busyness of the work and they get addicted to it in a way that they don't take a step back and look at the higher level strategy, which becomes more and more important as you go. So make sure that you take care of yourself before you learn to take care of others in a way, because when you learn to take care of yourself, you learn to take care of others much, much better. So that's one thing that is for certain. And the other one is, it's almost like counterintuitive to what I just said, but pressure makes diamonds, and putting yourself into high pressure situations, I think only makes you stronger. Like what we were saying, those experiences are what really chisel the marble into a sculpture, to bring it back to art. And putting yourself into these high pressure situations is your moment to turn yourself into a diamond versus shrinking away from it. So don't be afraid to go head first into certain things, and
Fantastic.
do it with the mental acuity by getting sleep, exercise, and chewing neurogum.
Fantastic. That's great. Could I finish off with three quick questions so people might get to know you a little
Yeah.
better? Quick questions, quick answers. What's the latest book that you've read and loved?
Deep by Matt Nestor or James Nestor. Yeah, James Nestor. It's about one of my favorite sports is free diving and spearfishing. I do that. I'm sure it happens in Australia all the time, but I
Yeah.
love doing that because I get to be in my element in the water and push human capacity. And it's all about the book itself is about free diving, but it's about pushing human capacity because humans thought we would in the early 1900s, which is not that long ago. Humans literally thought you would explode if you went below 30 feet.
Yeah.
And now people are going almost 400 feet underwater and breaking records on a single breath of air. And it's a cool book that goes through the author's journey on discovering free diving.
Yeah. Fantastic. What about, is there something that, now's the time to disclose it. Is there something that no one else knows about Kent? An interest, a fascination, something you've done that would give
Oh
some people
man,
insights?
man, that's I'm a pretty open book to be 100% honest. Um, for me, like I, I don't run with music, and I run a lot. I run ultra marathons. And I ran one last year. I plan on running two this year. And one of the most important things that I typically tend to do is like meditation while I run without music, and I
Yeah.
have all these thoughts that are in my head during that time. But um, this isn't really answering your question at all. But it's interesting that like a lot of like the learnings that I typically tend to have during these runs is trying not to distract myself with other people's opinions, or at least taking other people's opinion and consolidating it. And it's just something that I hope everyone else, learns to do. And yeah, I don't know. I guess like the one I was thinking about running without music as like something that is like pretty
Well,
atypical, and it's like the thing I do.
and
I've learned to do.
most people that are running recreationally have music in of some form, right? Now,
Yeah.
up until my mid late 40s, I also ran ultra distance,
Oh,
and I
awesome.
always ran without music.
It's
Be-
something we
be-
haven't got like,
Absolutely, because it's
the
the
pain,
process. Well, it's because
the
it's the
process.
process, right?
Yes.
How are you holding form? How are you always falling forward?
I
All
like
of
learned to love it.
what's the step cadence? Everyone has you know two lower cadence as opposed to get 80 steps in a minute and all this sort of business. But it's the process. Have you read The Law of Running? LORE?
No, but
You
I
will
will
love it.
now.
If you're a runner, it'll be like deep.
More running.
The Law of
Okay.
Running, LORE.
I'm I'm buying that. I'm buying that right after this.
So, is there one moment of pure happiness at any point in time? It just stands out for you, and why does that stand out?
Oh, man. I mean, I just got engaged, so obviously that was like a very special moment to me. And I've been with my partner for quite some time, so um, that's obviously one of the happiest moments in the last few years. But going back to running, I remember I was running a 50, and there was a point around mile 30 where I, I just had this like I like couldn't stop crying. It was so crazy. It was like a 5,500-foot elevation run in Yosemite, and I was doing pretty well. I ended up finishing fourth in my age group, but around mile 30, I like couldn't stop crying for about 2 miles because I was so grateful that I even had the ability to do this. And it doesn't even have to be about running, but even I was thinking about business, I was thinking about my life, I was thinking about everything. And my parents are immigrants that came over here with nothing, and now, you know, that translated over to me, obviously, and the optimism I try to bring to everything. And I was just so grateful. And I don't think I've ever felt that like immense, like overwhelming level of happiness while struggling, and my legs were on fire, my knees were hurting, my body hurt. Like it was it was just like a very special moment where I realized like all of us um don't realize how amazing it is that we're even alive and that we're able to do the things that we're able to do as long as you push yourself to do it. And it just only motivated me more to go experience and do more.
Um, we shouldn't get into a conversation about running, but
Yeah, I feel like that's a slippery slope,
um,
knowing that you're a runner.
if you don't do very long runs, it's hard to see this. But a couple of times I've done 100-kilometer runs around an
Oh my
athletics
gosh,
track, 250 laps of an athletic stadium as an endurance
that's
event.
incredible.
And you spend the first half of any ultra distance run running away from the start line,
Yes.
trying to get as much distance under your feet as you can. And so in reality, you can run in any direction and you'll get distance under your feet. But you tip through the halfway mark and now you have to run toward the end. And so only one direction works. And so, when you're running away from and there's no end, you never end up running toward. And so you quit. And I really only noticed that for the first time when I was doing 250 laps around the stadium, because I was counting how many laps I've run. And then about halfway through, I realized I was counting how many laps I had left. And so all of a sudden, there's a relatively small number of laps left. At the 3-quarter mark is when most people drop out, like 32 kilometers, which most people drop out of the 42K marathon. Most people drop out of the 88K comrades in South Africa at about the 62K mark. 30 miles of a 50-mile run is about the 3-quarter mark. And here's my experience of the 3-quarter mark is that's where everything hurts.
Yeah.
And you get a choice in that moment. And it's interesting what you said. The choice is you can be grateful that you're there and doing it, or you can be angry that you're there and doing it. And if you choose anger, it tends not to work out. It doesn't fuel you and drive forward. And when you choose that sense of gratitude, like everything's hurting, but check this out.
Yeah.
I've just run 75 kilometers, so you push through. And then after that, another energy kicks in. And the last part is always pretty good. Running is such a life instruction. I'm not saying everybody should do it because it does.
I had to write down what you said because, man, it's so spot on.
It does play havoc on your body if you don't do it right, but
yeah. But I feel like everyone should do some hard endurance, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be physical, like endurance really. Yes. Some of the biggest lessons I've ever learned is by getting over that pain point.
Yeah.
And to be really able to unlock a different version of yourself. So
you discover your real capacity in endurance pursuits. And as you say, it doesn't have to be running. It actually, any form of endurance, but endurance is full of these life lessons. It's been wonderful. We've pushed past the timeline a little bit, but it was great listening to you talk through this mixture of experiences and thinking that I'm sure people watching the episode will be able to get a lot of lessons out of. I just want to thank you so much for letting us know a bit more about Nootropics and how that works, the company, your views on immersive and experiential art, how that translates into business. Find the waypoints, but find the focal points, step back, get the big picture, and then go to work and have fun. Even the lessons out of the last little conversation about this moment of happiness, which I know for a fact would not be most people's sense of a great moment of happiness. I'm 30 miles into a 50-mile run, but there's joy in everything. So thank you so much for the time you spent.
No, likewise. Thank you so much for the convo.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.